The Raiders have a new quarterback, and you may be happy or you may not be happy. Jimmy G becomes Jimmy Vegas. The Raiders signed Jimmy Garoppolo. This is Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast, also heard on The Bet, over the air, on the radio in Las Vegas. Thanks for being with us. If you don't already subscribe to the show, make sure you do. Just go wherever you get your podcasts and search Silver and Black Today, and you can subscribe to us right there. Do us a favor, put on the auto download. That way you never miss a show. Things are heating up here in the offseason as free agency started this week. So we're going to be on top of it, and we're going to get going. So please do that as well. If you're watching us on YouTube, hey, how you doing? Make sure you jam in the chat there and have fun with us as we chat with you about the show today. And again, as always, I bring in my partner, my broadcast buddy, and that, of course, is Mr. Mo Moton, otherwise known as Midtown Mo.
Hey, look. It's Midtown Mo.
Oh, yeah. And so we got Midtown Mo Moton. He is the NFL national writer over at Bleacher Report. He's a busy dude this week, keeping up with everything around the NFL because he doesn't just write about the NFL. He also writes about the Raiders up on sportsnot.com, where you can catch his columns there. Follow him on Twitter, MoeMoton. I am at LV Gully. All right, Mo, what's the plan? What's the plan on quarterback? Okay, guess what? The plan is Jimmy Garoppolo is now the Raiders' starting quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo signs a 3-year deal for just about $72 million when you include all the bonus. But if you break this deal down, Mo, it's much more favorable to the Raiders, and we'll get into that in a second. Mixed reaction from Raider Nation as they get a guy. I don't know why people were surprised. We talked about this. We talked about him. We talked about system quarterbacks, people who know Josh McDaniels' complicated system, as Derek Carr called it. And so not a surprise, right? And the word leaked out early on Monday when the tampering period began that the Raiders were talking to Garoppolo. Not surprised. The Jets also were interested in him. The Texans, we heard all kinds of names, but this is the guy that the Raiders decided to have as, I believe, overall, a bridge guy. We'll see what they do with the young quarterback. We'll get in that a little bit later, but not surprised. Polarizing as is if the sun is coming up tomorrow in Raider Nation, the Jimmy Garoppolo signing. But Mo, overall, I want to get your reaction. You and I both didn't have anything against Jimmy Garoppolo's talent. What we've had problems with has been his ability to stay on the field, his availability. Give me your first impressions here. This Raider signing as Jimmy Garoppolo becomes a Las Vegas Raider.
My initial reaction, as many in Raider Nation know, I was against Jimmy Garoppolo being the Raiders' QB1 for the 2023 season simply because I didn't want the Raiders to overpay for a mediocre quarterback, which Jimmy Garoppolo is, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So when the signing happened, my phone started blowing up. I was in Midtown doing my thing at Bleacher Report. My producer was actually making fun of me as I was about to go on air 5 minutes before I went live, because I had to actually talk about it at the top of the show. And I said this. I said, while I didn't like the option that they took at quarterback, the route that they're taking, I like the deal for him because basically if he plays out 2 full years with the Raiders, he's getting $45 million guarantees. Based on his pattern of injuries, I have doubts that that's going to happen. But the Raiders basically protected themselves so that if he is hurt, they don't have to pay him a boatload of money. And for a bridge gap quarterback, I think his deal is very fair. The raw numbers, the face numbers were 3 years, I believe, what is it, $67.5 million?
Yep.
So it's about, it evens out to give or take about $22.5 million if you're looking at the face numbers, but you really care about the guaranteed money. And again, it's about 11. He's scheduled, I believe, guaranteed money, 11.25 each year, including there's an injury guarantee in there. If he's on the roster in 2024, there's another 11.25 million. So again, as I said, if he plays out 2 full years with the Raiders, he's going to basically get 45 million. If he stays up the third year, he'll get more guarantees, which will go up to, I believe, what he really wanted in contract talks. Because I think he wanted 25 mil per year.
Correct.
And those incentives, there are playoff incentives in there. There's a per game bonus of, I believe, 90,000, I believe. Mm-hmm. So again, he has to trigger all those things to get all the money that they're signing him for. And again, based on his pattern of play, there's serious doubt that he'll get all of that money anyway. But if he does, you want that because you want your bridge gap quarterback to be healthy.
Right. And to your point, it's incentive laden, so to speak. I mean, you talked about the 11.25 million base salary, 3.75 million at signing. So he gets that when he walks in the building. He gets another million if he makes the roster, which he will. Workout if he as long as he doesn't get hurt. A workout bonus of 220 to do that. So you look at the cap hit is 16.3 this year, a dead cap of 33.7 because of the guaranteed money up front. But yes, you look at that 33.75 guaranteed at signing, 11.25. We talked about that. 2024 roster bonus, so is about 11.25 guaranteed again, and he gets a pregame active bonus of 90,000. You mentioned that's another $1 million, and then he's got another 1.5 million annual playing time playoff incentive. So to me, that was again we talked about it. The knock, and a lot of people are saying, well, this is kind of a lateral move. You got rid of Derek Carr. Jimmy G, Derek Carr, kind of about the same, although Derek Carr has more numbers, obviously, because he started longer in the NFL, even though they're the same age, by the way. But the difference is that you're looking at it from a much different perspective here because of the money. This allows the Raiders, because somebody asked me on Twitter on Monday, what was Carr going to get? Carr was going to get, $39 million if he was on the roster next year, total compensation, somewhere around there. So if you look at that, then suddenly you're like, oh, okay. So when you look at the number, it's much more favorable for the Raiders. And I know it's hard to get excited about. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is above average. I do. I think that when he's healthy, again, when he's healthy is the big thing here. So I could see the Raiders do this. This tells me, Mo, that I think the Raiders have plans to do something else at quarterback. I think they're either going to bring in a slew of young guys to try to see who can make it, and they'll probably end up drafting. This does not mean they won't draft somebody if they really can do it early in the first round at quarterback. They may if they can get up there. I don't think there anybody will be left at 7. So if they can't get to 3, at least they got a guy that says, okay, when you look at the money, we're going to be in this for 2 years with Jimmy Garoppolo. Either way you look at it, they have the out after next year. If they were to somehow, let's just say the stars align, not saying it's going to happen, and CJ Stroud, they somehow can get him, and that's their kid, and they go get him, they let him sit for a year, and they can say goodbye to Jimmy Garoppolo with an $18 million cap hit, or they keep him around as a backup, right? The key there is that I don't think this is their plan for the next 5 years. Now, if Jimmy G goes out and has an amazing year or 2 years, then maybe it changes their plans. But I don't think they're done at quarterback.
I don't think they're done at quarterback either, simply because this is not a contract that you pay a quarterback that you're committing to for beyond 2 years.
Right.
Anyone who's freaking out about this Jimmy Garoppolo deal, I understand it, because I didn't want Jimmy Garoppolo either. But the deal is very palatable. If Jimmy Garoppolo makes you sick to your stomach, just take a look at over the cap, and there's basically an out after every year. Now the dead cap money goes down as time goes on. If they let him go after 1 year, there's a dead cap left over 18.75, kind of steep, but I'm sure they, if they wanted to get out of it, they could. And after the second year, the Raiders will only have a dead cap of about 3.75 million. So again, this is essentially, they're hoping that he can stick around for 2 years. The way this deal is constructed, they're hoping that he could be their solid starter for at least through 2024. But as you said, I think they're still going to draft a quarterback early, just simply because the way this deal is crafted, they know what Jimmy Garoppolo's injury history is. They understand that he hasn't played a full season in 2 of the last 3 years. Right. They understand he's missed 18 games since 2020. So I would think that this team still wants to draft a quarterback early. People are saying, well, they got Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a surefire starter. Why would they draft one early? Just go with the defense. And I will say this, and I don't have this source myself, but I've been reading the tea leaves, and multiple insiders, multiple reputable, credible insiders have said the Raiders were actually in on trying to get that number 1 overall pick from the Bears. Yeah. It's just the fact that the Panthers put in DJ Moore, which tipped the scale in their favor. The Raiders, I guess, weren't willing to put in a player that was better than DJ Moore in the deal. But the Raiders, just put it in, type it into Google. You all can use Google very well. Just read the reports.
I don't know.
The Raiders were in on trying to get that number 1 overall pick, which tells me that they like at least 1 or 2 quarterbacks at the top.
Yep.
So if they still feel like they can get one of those guys, I still feel like the Raiders may think about trading up to number 3. Now, I wouldn't do it for Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, but the fact that they were willing to trade up to number 1 tells you that they like someone in this draft, and that person could still be available at number 3 if they're moving up.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think what the disappointment with some fans who did not want Jimmy Garoppolo, It's really interesting, the discussion, Mo, and you and I talked about this, and of course it came to a head with the Garoppolo signing on Monday. Well, it's official tomorrow, but the reported signing is that fans completely lose their minds during free agency. We were 1 hour into free agency, and I had people tweeting, 1 hour. I had people tweeting at me, these guys suck. They're not doing anything. I thought they were going to be bold. I'm like, dude, it's 1 effing hour. 1 hour. It's amazing to me that people will jump from they haven't done anything to an hour to they will be 0-17. Okay? There's people out there who I went back and forth with discussion saying, you got to give the guy pay. You got to give Dave Ziegler 3 years. You can't base it off 1 year when he had no first and second round draft pick. No, the expectation is to win right away. Okay. How would that be? Hey, you started your new job. Hey, I expect you to sell, let's say you sell cars. Sell 5 cars today or you're fired. Well, I just got here. I'm just learning. Oh, sorry. No, it doesn't work that way. And so the emotional ridiculousness that you see when this free agent starts, it did last year too. And then the Devontae Adams trade came. Oh, these guys are great. Let's get a T-shirt with Dave Ziegler's face on it. Now he's terrible, and they can't win. And we should have just kept Carr, even though it meant $40 million instead of what Garoppolo's going to get now. It's just amazing to me. I get the emotion, right? I get the emotion. But Mo, the Raiders have to fill a lot of spots. You can't declare that they're going to be terrible because you don't like the quarterback they sent. I know it's an important position, but I think people really thought it was going to be, we will have the number 1 pick and we'll get a superstar young quarterback, or it's going to be Lamar Jackson. Like, I don't think they thought in between.
The funny thing is, I wasn't here for the Lamar Jackson episode, but I heard some of what you had to say, and I pushed back on a lot of it. And I was like, the Raiders are not going to give Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed deal, which he reportedly wants. No. People will push back and say he doesn't want a fully guaranteed deal because something that Stephen A. said. And I will say, when's the last time someone has cited Stephen A. Smith as a credible NFL source? But that's a whole different subject. The Raiders weren't going to pay Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed deal, so I didn't even entertain that thought. But as far as the quarterback situation is concerned right now, today, Jimmy Garoppolo's cap number is a lot lower than what Derek Carr's would have been this year. So that's where the Raiders are saving. They will have more room to make a deal for a big time free agent. Because I'm just saying, I'm not a reporter, but I have my feelers out there, and I think the Raiders are going to make a big signing. If by the time you're hearing me right now, the Raiders have not made a big signing, they will. I think by Tuesday, I think a lot of fans will be happy because the other 2 signings that we'll mention during the show. Brendan Faison coming back to the Raiders because he was with the Raiders under Gus Bradley, and Marcus Epps, who's coming from the Eagles. To me, those are 2 underwhelming signings. Yeah, Faison can play in the pinch, but let's see what he looks like outside of Gus Bradley's system. To me, Marcus Epps is a 3rd-grade safety. He's not a starter, in my opinion. No, he played free safety for the Eagles, but he wasn't good in coverage. He allowed a 139.1 passer rating and I believe a 73% completion rate or higher last year as a full-time starter. So if that guy is your starting safety in coverage at deep safety position, I would be concerned. I think he's more of a special teams, again, 3rd safety guy. I wouldn't get excited about either signing, but I think the Raiders are going to have something brewing pretty soon if they haven't already by the time you're listening to this.
Yeah, you're listening to this show either on Tuesday morning or Tuesday during the day, so any signings that happened on Tuesday haven't been reported yet, so that's why you're not hearing about them here. But I agree. I think, again, fans are wanting to fire everybody already after 1 day of free agency when the Raiders aren't done. They're not done, and they have a lot of draft. Listen, again, I don't understand. I saw somebody tweet, and I think I sent it to you, Mo, that the Raiders had to sign all 5 of these guys or it's a failure. It's like, Javon Hargrave, who, of course, signed elsewhere with the 49ers. And every top free agent, this person said they had to sign or it was a failure. It's like, who bats 1,000 on free agents that are all making 20? By the way, if you signed all those guys a year at it was between 18 and 24 million each, you can't do it. You can't do it. I mean, let's be real here. So expectations, and I'm tired, Raider Nation. I'm sorry. If you've been a fan for 30 years and you're tired of 20 years of losing, I don't know what to tell you. It has nothing to do with what these new guys are doing. Last year does, right, Mo? We were critical of the coach, of the GM on this show all last year for missteps. They're responsible for that. But your solution, because you don't like Jimmy G, is to fire everybody and that this franchise is ass. Well, if that's your go follow Carr to New Orleans. I've seen a lot of fans go back and forth on that because they're like, okay, if you don't want to be, and hey, I get it. If you don't want to be a Raider fan anymore, totally up to you. But most of you I know are not because you're in it till you die. So that's it. But Mo, the Jimmy G signing, the numbers on the screen are a little off as we got updated numbers before we went on. But I will tell you, this is a very team-friendly contract. It's got a lot of built in for him to stay healthy. And it tells me that if they don't get a quarterback high in the draft this year, then they got their guy for 2 years. 2 years. So they're asking Jimmy G to start for 2 years. And because then next year, if they don't do well this year, then they have an opportunity to go get a quarterback next year, whether they're high in the first round, somewhere else in the first round, and they trade up and they get capital to do so. So really interesting. Closing thoughts on Jimmy G before we go to the break.
So closing thoughts on Jimmy G spot before we move on, right? His guaranteed money, $45 million, is about 15th among quarterbacks in the NFL. So that's mid-range. Again, to me, that's in the range of what you want to pay a bridge gap quarterback that you're expecting to start for 2 years. Again, there's basically not after every year, but after the first year, I believe it's about, again, $18.75 million. So you don't want to have that much on your dead cap. So what that tells me is, again, they're hoping for at least 2 years of healthy Jimmy G. But it doesn't preclude them from going up and getting a quarterback that they like, which I do believe they like at least one of the quarterbacks in this draft, maybe two, if they were willing to trade up to the number 1 spot. So we'll see if they still move up to number 3. I would say no if it's for Levis or Anthony Richardson. I would wait to see if one of those guys is available at 7. If you pick those guys at 7, fine, but I'm not moving up for either one of those guys. If somehow Stroud's available at 3, though, I am blowing up the Cardinals' phone to get that spot to get a CJ Stroud, or even if Bryce Young is available, because I hear that the Panthers are split on who they want at the top between Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. But as for the Raiders and Jimmy Garoppolo, most of the articles you read on Jimmy Garoppolo are going to end with if he stays healthy. And I will say this. What I don't want the Raiders to be is mediocre. And unfortunately, right now, until they add some big signings to their defense, because Jimmy Garoppolo isn't coming from San Francisco with that 49ers defense. Right. He's going from playing with a top defense down to a bottom tier defense. So the Raiders have a lot of work to do on the other side of the ball if they want to make this Jimmy G thing work. As of right now, they're still a 7 to 9 win team, which is what you don't want to be in the NFL because it takes you out of range. And next year for Khalid Williams, Drake May, and you're not exactly a playoff team. So you're stuck in that no man's land. So the Raiders, again, they have a lot of work to do after Jimmy G.
Yeah, and for those of you who are complaining about Jimmy G, I just want to point out, I want to use Geno Smith as an example, right? Because you talked about the pay being about 15th in the NFL. Geno Smith has one good year now. Geno Smith, we all know his career track through the NFL, right? Career backup, never led his team to a Super Bowl, didn't do any of that, didn't get in the playoff, that kind of stuff. He's going to make about $10 million, so just a little less than Jimmy Garoppolo this year. And then in 2024, if he sticks it, if the Seahawks don't exercise an out, meaning if he has a good another year, he's going to be making almost $30 million a year in his second year. Okay, so I think it's important to compare some of these deals. To your point, no, I'm not saying that you should be going out and buying a bunch of Jimmy G jerseys. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, though, is it gives the Raiders the room they need to build the rest of their team to pursue a young quarterback this year or next year and still try to get a more competitive balance on their roster. So,
just one final quick comment. Scott, I just want to make Raiders fans know that I'm not here to polish a turd and tell you it's rainbows and unicorns. Again, I'm not telling you to go out there and do cartwheels for Jimmy G. But what I'm telling you is if you were going to get Jimmy G, and we talked about this, that he was a realistic option for the Raiders, you just didn't want to overpay for him. And the Raiders didn't do that. And they also protected themselves with these incentives. So you at least can see that at least Dave Ziegler knows what he's doing when it comes to drawing up these contracts.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we are going to step aside, take our first break here on Silver and Black today. When we come back, we're going to touch on the rest of free agency. Mo mentioned, of course, the face-on coming back to the Raiders, signing on Monday, as well as Marcus Epps, a reserve safety, I guess is what you would call him at best. Maybe just a roster guy to start the season. We don't know yet, but we'll talk a little bit about that and about what they're going to do with the rest of free agency and what needs they have, how can they can address them. Some of the players we thought they could use are already gone, and we'll talk about that when we come back. You're listening to Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast. Welcome back. Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast. Moton along with Scott Gulbransen. We are here talking Raiders football. We talked a lot about Jimmy G in the first, and yes, we both were not in favor of the Raiders signing Jimmy G, just to make it clear. The contract is friendly for the team, though, so there's that. You can take that away from it, and hopefully they're able to draft a young quarterback. But we'll talk about that later as too. All right, Mo, we look at the Raiders and the rest of free agency. As we move into day 2, we've seen some guys that we've thought that they should compete, especially you wrote a column up on Sportsnot. I think it was with 15 free agents the Raiders should sign. One of them, Jesse Bates, from the safety from Cincinnati, who I thought should have been high on their radar. Guess what? Atlanta comes in, swoops him away, so he's gone. Jordan Poyer, of course, from Buffalo, still out there. He has not signed yet. He's a guy they could target. When you look at that safety position, outside of Marcus Epps, which we're not real overly excited about either, who else left out there? I mean, the Raiders, I think, either cornerback or safety. It could be one or the other. The safeties in the NFL draft this year it's not a deep class. In fact, it's a pretty poor class, where at cornerback it's much better. When you look at the situation with free agents, is that what you're expecting? Are you expecting one of these safeties to get to Vegas here in the next day or so?
Well, Poyer has been connected to the Las Vegas Raiders ever since he got on. I forgot which show he got on, but he said he wanted to go somewhere that was, tax-free, nice weather. And people said, got to be Las Vegas, right? So we'll see about that. Again, a lot of outlets have connected him to the Raiders. I don't know. Raiders kind of like their older safeties. They did sign Deron Harmon last year, who I believe is 32 years old. So Poyer is about that age, 31, 32. So I can see that being a fit. The other guy we'll look out for is Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, or C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
CJ.
That's a guy I like from the Eagles because he played a lot of safety last year. He was mostly a slot with the New Orleans Saints for his first 3 years, and then the Saints traded him to the Eagles. And he pretty much blew up at this free safety position. He led the league with 6 interceptions with 3 other players. So the Raiders need a ball hawk. They were last in turnovers last year with only 13, I believe, or tied for last in turnovers with 13. And they only had 6 interceptions. So they need someone who's going to force some turnovers and take the ball away, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson can do that. So those are the 2 guys that I'm looking at the safety position.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And I think that's the safety position, again, you cannot address it with where they're going to pick in the draft. I don't think they're going to address it in the first 2 rounds, which kind of goes by the wayside there. You also look at cornerback, some of the guys you mentioned. One, of course, is a trade. So the rumor has been that Darius Slay is available. Is Darius Slay, Jalen Ramsey's gone to Miami. A lot of Raider fans were upset about that. And you brought up a good point, I did as well, which was everyone's like, oh, that's all it costs. But no, Jalen Ramsey wants a new contract. So you're taking on a guy, and yes, the compensation back as far as picks or players go might not have been that great. And Raider fans look at that and say, why didn't the Raiders do that? The issue is he wants more money. He's not happy with his current contract.
The other thing is, I believe he wanted to go to Miami. So it's nothing you can really do if a player wants to go to specific destinations and they want a new deal. See, I think what a lot of people forget is that you may want a player, but that player may not want to go to your team. That player may not have your team on their preferred destinations list. And again, he wanted to go to Miami. Miami is going to give him, I believe, 3 years fully guaranteed. So I think they were 2 years that he had, and then he added on $25 million guarantee on a 3rd year. So you got to understand that I don't think the Raiders were going to be willing to pay him that type of contract. Now, I will say I would call the Eagles about Darius Slay, because if Jalen Ramsey went for a 3rd, if Darius Slay wants to play for the Raiders, maybe the Raiders can get a discount on Darius Slay as well. But you also got to remember Darius Slay is 32 years old, so you're not going to pay a whole lot of money for Darius Slay. So the price should come down on him because of his age. But the tricky thing you have to keep in mind with the Eagles and Darius Slay's contract is that the Eagles will save more money if they trade him after June 1. So if they trade him and designate it as a post-June 1 trade, they would save about 17 or more million. But if they trade him before June 1, it would be like $3.7 million saved. So the Eagles, for them, it doesn't help them much to trade him after June 1 unless they just really need the draft capital that bad. So if the Raiders don't trade, or if no team trades for Darius Slay before June 1, I would still look out for him after the draft, because there's a possibility he could be traded during the summer. And if I'm the Raiders, I would circle back. Even if they do draft the cornerback early, I would circle back and ask about Darius Slay because, again, right now it's Nate Hobbs and Amik Robertson and Brendan Faisal, which is not an impressive group.
Another guy you mentioned, Mo, was James Bradbury of the Eagles at cornerback. That's one of the names that I really like, and I think he's one of those guys available that, to me, would be in their market and would be somebody they would be in on. Of course, we haven't heard that yet, but tell us about Bradbury, why he fits well with Patrick Graham's system.
Well, first of all, he had a Pro Bowl year. He had his only Pro Bowl year under Patrick Graham in New York. He had one of his best years. Now, he was a second-team All-Pro this past season. People will scoff at the penalty he had in the Super Bowl, but that was one mistake. He had a great year last year. So not only has he been consistent, but he knows Patrick Graham's system, and he was a good player under Patrick Graham. So I feel like the Raiders should have signed him last offseason when the Giants let him go. The Eagles swooped him up, and it worked out for them. Yeah. Now you're hearing that they could be interested in him again. I think it still makes sense because he's still playing at a high level. Add on James Bradbury. Now it's going to cost you more than $7 million, which is what the Eagles paid for him this past year. But I think he's still a solid, significant upgrade. Even if you bring back a Rock Ya-Sin, I think James Bradbury is the upgrade over Rock Ya-Sin.
Yeah, no question. And looking at the rest of the needs they have here, I mean, one of the things we talked about, the defensive line, of course, all those Raider fans. Of course, Javon Hargrave. Oh, got to go get him. Got to go to him. And, of course, San Francisco sweeps in, gives him the money, and that San Francisco defense just ridiculous up front. I mean, just got more ridiculous. It doesn't seem fair. But there are guys like Draymond Jones still out there. There are options for the Raiders here. Mo, they have to. Everybody's still focused on the offensive line. When I was arguing this week that, can they use upgrades on the offensive line? Absolutely. But they're not. I don't think people are giving credit enough to Jermaine Illuminor and some of the other guys who really did get better as the year went on. I'm not saying that they're a top-line offensive line, but they got better. And I think in some ways the defensive line, especially on the interior, is worse off than the offensive line.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And you mentioned Javon Hargrave off the board going to the San Francisco 49ers, where they're going to have another elite front four. The name I would watch out for is Dalvin Tomlinson, because he's also played under Patrick Graham. Before he went to the Minnesota Vikings, he was with the Giants, so he's familiar with Patrick Graham's defense. Now, he's not the sack go-getter, but he's definitely going to help you in the run defense. The Raiders do need a 3T, a three-technique defensive tackle who's going to generate some pressure. Why not bring back Jerry Tillery? I know that's not going to excite a lot of people, but I would just bring him back at a low cost. It's not a heavy defensive tackle market now that Javon Hargrave is off the market. Now that Jerron Payne has re-signed with the Washington Commanders, he has a huge money extension. So there aren't any really needle movers out there. I mentioned Dalvin Tomlinson, but again, he's not really known for his pass rushing ability. So the Raiders may have to go through the draft to get their three-technique defensive tackle. But as far as the offensive line you mentioned, I think eventually they get back with Jermaine Illuminor. He has that right tackle spot. I'm more focused on the guard position. You mentioned that Sportsnet article that I wrote. I believe I have a few guards on that list. Mm-hmm. One of them being Dalton Risner. I think Isaiah Wynn. He played tackle. He has some position versatility. He played left guard at Georgia on the collegiate level before he went to the NFL. So I think there's some offensive linemen they'll add. I really think they're going to add one or two guards. But as far as the defensive tackle spot, you mentioned Draymond Jones. He could also be a fit. He's probably the last name that big money deal, but he's going to I think he'll command close to $20 million a year. Will the Raiders be willing to pay that? We'll see if, where he goes and what he gets.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting. Isaiah Wynn, again, we mentioned the two at offensive line. It's going to be, we saw the Denver Broncos. Look what they did. They bolstered their offensive line, and they had to. What Russell Wilson went through with McGlinchey and, of course, the kid from Baltimore as well. And so you saw what's happening there, and then add Jarrett Stidham as their backup quarterback. So the division.
That was a surprise.
It was a very big surprise, and I know a lot of Raider Nation was counting on Jarrett Stidham to be the starter this year. That's the one thing I'll say, since we're revisiting the quarterback just for a second, which is there were people disappointed that it wasn't Jarrett Stidham and it was Jimmy G, and Jarrett Stidham started one game. Now, I understand the money aspect, but now that we have the numbers, not too bad off. And again, you and I both not excited about Jimmy G as the quarterback, or Jimmy Vegas as I call him now. So we'll see how that all goes. Mo, when you look at
I call him Jimmy G Spot, but
this is a family show, man.
Sorry.
when you look at linebackers, Jermaine Pratt, Cincinnati Bengal, and one of those guys, there's not a lot of off-ball linebackers in the draft, by the way, either. There is a couple of good ones, but not guys that necessarily the Raiders. But you have David Long out there too, is another guy that a lot of Raider fans talk about. The linebacker position. The linebacking position is not as in demand as what's sort of like what the running back is on the defense, because the position has changed and there's those hybrid spots now. But you look at those two guys, which are two guys that you mentioned in your piece as well, and what's available on the market. I think that's got to be with Denzel Perryman now gone into free agency. The Raiders got to address the linebacking position, don't they?
They absolutely have to. And you mentioned I had David Long Jr. before we went on. He signed with the Dolphins.
Oh, there you go.
Jermaine Pratt is going back to the Cincinnati Bengals, so that took off the two guys that I had my eye on. I have Landon Roberts on the list too as a bargain bin option. The problem with Landon Roberts is he's not very good in coverage. He's more of a two-down linebacker who can contribute on the blitz. So if you need a guy to blitz inside, he's your guy for that because he has the speed. He's about 6'1", 238, quick, but again, can't cover. I won't say can't, but he's a liability in coverage. So the Raiders may have to look at the linebacker position in the draft along with the defensive tackle spot if they don't make any splashes in free agency. But I will say that, who knows? There could be a guy out there that gets traded because on Monday, even before I did my live show, there were guys out there requesting to speak with other teams. Austin Eckler from the Chargers requested to speak with other teams because he was trying to get a new deal. So every year there's a surprise trade that we don't foresee happening because the guy wants a new contract and the team is not willing to pay him that. So I would just look out for trades that could happen. There was a tweet that I put out earlier on Monday, and I said the Raiders should make a call for Patrick Queen. And I think it's a realistic possible trade simply because the Ravens acquired Roquan Smith from the Bears, and they gave him a new 5-year, $100 million deal. You don't see teams paying two inside linebackers big money contracts.
No way.
And Eric DeCosta, the general manager of the Ravens, was very non-committal about Patrick Queen's future, which means he's probably not going to re-sign him on a big money deal, being that they got Roquan Smith. If I'm the Raiders, I'm calling for Patrick Queen because he vastly improved last year under that Raiders defense.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to step aside for our final break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the league. We'll talk about, as at the time of recording, things are changing so quickly and things are happening so fast that we may end up talking about things that have already changed by the time you listen to it. That's just the nature of the biz, if you will. We're not NFL Network. We can't be on the air for 12 hours just waiting for things to happen, like I watched this morning. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, we'll do that when we come back. We'll go through some of that. Where's Aaron Rodgers going to end up? We already have reports that he has been traded. We'll talk about that when we come back, as well as how some of these other movements could affect the Las Vegas Raiders. He is Moton. I'm Scott Gulbransen. This is Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast covering the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The home stretch here on Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast, or if you're listening to us over the air on the Bet in Las Vegas. I almost said 1140. That used to be the call numbers. Now we're on 98.5, the Bet in Las Vegas. All combined there in station. So if you're listening to us over there, thanks for being with us. He is Moton, national NFL writer for Bleacher Report. He is working his tail off this week as the league new year starts. You can follow him on Twitter, MOEMOTON. He also writes specifically about the Raiders on sportsnaut.com. Catch his columns up there. You can follow me at LV Gully, but I'm not taking crap this week. I've already muted a lot of you because you're not using your head. But anyway, follow me there. Have some fun. So many great Raider fans, but so many I just can't believe what these keyboard commandos out there. But anyway, we love engaging with you. Also, the show, SNB Today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the auto download. And if you're watching us over